So before we start and before we get to the point to talk about React navigation, how about we, stop for a second to talk what React navigation really is. For those who haven't heard about it, where does the idea for React navigation comes from, and what is, its biggest selling point?
Yeah, so React Navigation is like a navigation library. What it does, it lets you manage screens in your app because every app is built of several screens and you want to switch between those screens, have animations, have UI like tab bar and drawer. And React Navigation is a library which has built-in elements for all of those things so that you can easily implement navigation in your app without having to write all of that code by yourself. So you can compare it to React Router on web, but the difference is React Router provides only logic and React Navigation provides both logic and UI on top of it. And it implements the native patterns like we have a drawer on Android or bottom tab bar on iOS, and we have a sliding tab bar on Android and a stack navigator with normal screen transitions between screens. So that's what React navigation is. So the idea of React navigation was came way before, like very long ago. When React Native first launched, there was a navigator called Navigator, basically, and that was a pure JavaScript implementation. And there was also another navigator built into React Native called Navigator iOS, and it was a native implementation, but it only worked with iOS. So we had these two options, Navigator and Navigator iOS. And Navigator iOS provided a fully native navigation, but it was only available on iOS. Navigator provided a JavaScript implementation and it was cross-platform, but there were some fundamental problems with that. So the problem was it wasn't using the animated API. So due to that, it could never use the native driver. And that means animations will always be in JavaScript and they will not be as performant as they could be. And it was also not very customizable. So to fix that, Eric Vishanti, who was working at Facebook back then, he came up with a new idea. So he built something called Navigation Experimental. It was way more feature rich than Navigator, but it was very low level. So it gave you the pieces to build a navigation library, and you had to assemble those pieces, write your own logic on top of it, and use it. It only provided you with animations without any logic on how you want to manage those screens. So it was cool. I had used it in a couple of apps when I was working on it. I was working on my apps, and while it was very, very useful and very flexible, it was a lot of custom code that we had to write to implement it. So it wasn't ideal. So the next thing was X navigation, which was from Expo. It was built by Adam Mickiewicz, and it was also maintained by Brent Watney. X navigation was built on top of Navigation Experimental, but it provided a very nice API to manage your navigation code. So you didn't have to write as much. And before X navigation, the only thing we had was a stack navigation. So we had screens and we switched between those screens. So what X navigation brought to the table is it provided a lot of different patterns. It didn't have only stack navigator. It has a tab navigator, it had a drawer navigator, and this is how you can see this is the first version of React navigation. I mean, not code-wise, but the spiritual first version of React navigation. And in addition to X navigation, there were also some other libraries. Like there was a native navigation library from Airbnb, which is now no longer maintained. There is also another native navigation library from Wix. So, since the Airbnb version was no longer maintained, the Wix native navigation library is like the most popular native navigation library right now. And we had X navigation with that. But X navigation was maintained by Expo, so they wanted to like build something for the community and make it even more flexible than it was. So some developers from Expo and Facebook and community came together to start a new navigation library called React Navigation. It was also built on a navigation experimental, but it has a completely new API which was very simple and easy to use, with providing a lot of functionality. So that's how React Navigation started, and over the years React Navigation has evolved a lot, and it has become the most popular navigation library in the community.
Nice. Thank you, Satya, for this.
Yeah, and
Nice.
maybe
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I just wanted to add my experience when I was first working with React Navigation. It was right after I was introduced to the entire React Native ecosystem. So I was a bit overwhelmed, but a lot of different things, and React Navigation was sort of a familiar face because it's also has a component-based syntax like most popular routing libraries on the web. So I appreciate the ad at the start. Then it has a couple of very interesting built-in options like draw and stack navigators, which cover some basic use cases for coordination when you are trying to write your first app. That's the reason I would recommend any newcomer to the React Native world to try that.
Yeah, I actually, wanted to say that, I really kind of share the same experience as you, Mateusz, with, React Navigation. And actually, I wanted to thank Satya for doing this very deep history on React Navigation that kind of reminded me of all my struggles with navigations ever since I built my first React Native app, starting from Navigator. That's been like 4 years before I go. Yeah, that's been a crazy time. And I also remember, when Navigation Experimental launched with, the component-based sort of syntax. That was the first, I guess, navigation to have it. It was, so different, almost like you were about to switch from classes to functions. Like I couldn't wrap my head around it, how to even do it. But looks like the paradigm over time, became most popular. And actually, just wanted to ask about the popularity itself, because as you, Satya, said, and Mateusz, you maybe have made some choices before as to which library to choose. React Navigation, when it was released, it wasn't the only navigation. It wasn't just replacing the navigation experimental and nothing more. There were actually other libraries, as you said. And so I'm just wondering, how did that competition ended up being? Was React Navigation a superior library from the very beginning, or do you, as maintainers and community builders, had to sort of fight for it, advocate for it? How did that happen that React Navigation became, the sort of recommended library?
So, like the most important part of a library is documentation, and I think the reason React Navigation became so popular because we focused on like improving the documentation a lot, because we spent a lot of time just to have like tutorials in the tutorial format and just not have API reference like most libraries do. Because when beginners come to a library, the first thing they're looking for are tutorials. they are not going to read the API docs and figure out how to string them together, right? So I think that was like the most important part of why React Navigation became popular. And another thing is, since React Navigation was built with JavaScript, we were able to iterate very fast on it and add new features and fix bugs very fast than we would have been able to if it was fully native. So I think that gave us an edge.
Cool. Makes total sense, and I totally agree. And by the way, really, wanted to thank you and the whole React Navigation team for, making it such a strong part of the library itself. Tutorials and stuff like that. I've been also reading these docs quite often, just to learn about some patterns. So that's really appreciated. Cool.